Welcome back to another episode of Caribidreams TV. I am your host, Maurice John, Mr. Property, and I have a very interesting video for you today. So, what are we going to be talking about? One of the most asked questions by persons who are looking for property to buy is, what can my salary afford? Now, I usually tell clients, if you're coming to look for property, it is important to go and have a meeting with your loans officer and find out what bracket do you fall when it comes to affording a property. Now, unfortunately, you have loans officers who tell clients, go and find the property and come back. Then we'll tell you if you can afford it, which is quite frustrating for real estate agents. When you go out, you look for property with clients, and then you find out later that they cannot afford that property. So I am seeking to assist persons who are looking into buying houses or land to guide them as to what exactly can your salary afford. So how are we going to be doing this? What are the assumptions that we're going to be making? All right, so I have about 4 assumptions that I'm making for this breakdown. 1, the banks only lend you 45% of your gross salary in loans, in total loans. Now, what does that mean? Now, if you're going to the bank and you're making X number of dollars, 45% of that X number of dollars, all of your loans must add up to that 45%. And that means if you have a car loan, if you have a student loan, if you have the house loan, if you buy something by quotes, all of those must add up to that 45%. So that's the first assumption, that we work with that 45% threshold. The second thing, there is a gas vehicle bill that we have for the higher income brackets. Now, we're going to assume that for people who are going to buy a house, it's not always that situation, but you have bought your vehicle and paid it off before you start looking for a house, because it's going to be very difficult to carry your mortgage and a vehicle loan. So we're trying to see how we could mitigate against having both of those loans carried. Not the perfect situation, but to maximize your salary, we're going to go that way. All right, so for interest rate, we're going to be using a 5% interest rate over 25 years. So that will mean that you will fall within that bracket. So the banks will give you one of those 5% loans in terms of interest rate, and you have enough years of working years that you could get at least 25 years. All right, and being a Christian and knowing that there's a church on almost every corner in St. Vincent, I'm going to assume that all Vincentians pay their tithes. So that is 10% of your earnings goes to tithes. All right? All right, good. So now that the assumptions are out of the way, what are the salary brackets that we're going to be using? We're going to be using 1,500, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, and 8,000. A wide spread, so you could see what could I afford when I take out my expenses. What kind of property could I afford to get? All right, so let's dive into that breakdown. It's gonna be on the screen for you to follow along. Now, for us to get what monies that you're getting on your hand, which is your net pay, we have to look at the taxes and the NIS. That comes out before you even smell your salary. All right? So, at $1,500, you don't count in terms of taxes. When you go up to $3,000, you pay about $275 in taxes, $4,000, $575, $5,000, $875, $6,000, you're looking at $1,175. When you go up to $8,000, you're looking at $1,775 in terms of taxes. For NIS, you pay 4.29% of your salary, And if you look at the spread there, it goes from $64.35 on at the 3,000 mark. And when you go up to $8,000, you'll be paying about $343. So if you look on the screen, you'll see what lands in my account when the month is done. Now, of course, you pay tithes, which is your 10% of your salary, and that budget line comes out. Now, if you look, you're going to see some empty spaces for different categories. For one, I say that an assumption, which I should have included, an assumption that I have here is that you own a vehicle that takes about $100 worth of gas every week. And we're going to assume that every month you have about 4 weeks in the month. So you're paying about $400 every month in gas. Now, why does the $3,000 and the $1,500 salary point not include that $400? I'm basically saying at that price, at that budget, more than likely it's going to be quite difficult for you to carry a mortgage and also afford a vehicle. Because if you then include that gas bill, it reduces dramatically what you could afford as a property if you put in that $400. So for the $3,000 and $1,500, these people don't have vehicles. And the health insurance and the life insurance, which is very, very important, but I removed it from the $4,000, the $3,000, and the $1,500 because it really damages how much you could borrow. And then when you look at the $1,500 salary, I'm assuming here that these people still live at home with their parents, and I put $300 there for groceries, which is basically a contribution to the living expenses at home. So that is explaining the missing components in the Excel, well, the breakdown. All right, so I outlined what the missing components of the breakdown are. Now let's look at the finer details. So you have your groceries. So I put a scale ranging from $650 at the high end. If you're making $8,000, you could afford to spend about $650 a month. And if you are at the lower end, the $1,500, $300. Then we talked about the vehicle, $100 a week, 4 weeks in a month, you know, average. And then we say electricity. Electricity, you could move from 200 up to 250. Sometimes they go up to 300. But if you are good with your electricity bill, I don't think you should pass 250, 300. Water is normally not that high also. So we move from $70 to $100 in the water department. In terms of internet, I pulled it from Flo's website. We have the bundle, I have the phone, the internet, and cable, and that $225, I use that as a standard. All right. Then you have your health insurance and your life insurance. I used $150 for the health insurance and $100 for your life insurance. Those figures could change based on what kind of coverage that you want, but for maximizing the salary, those are what I used. All right, for savings, now I tried my best to include savings in this because you should not totally max out your salary and not be able to save every month something, because what is not included here is if you have a child, your whole life is going to change. There are things that you're going to have to spend on that when you're single you don't. I have not included in this budget cost of having children. So if you have a healthy savings every month, you could save $500 every month and you keep that consistent, then you could navigate life's ups and downs. So I have from the $1,500, you could save $250 a month, and then the $3,000, you save about $200 a month, up to $500. For me, not the best savings, but it's something to work with. All right, so now let's look at what can I afford at each bracket point. Now, if you are making $1,500 a month, it's very, 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 very difficult for you to afford a home with $1,500 a month. So what I see you be able to afford is a piece of land. If you're renting, it becomes even more difficult to own a property at that $1,500. That $1,500 is me basically living at home, buying a piece of land so that in the future when I get a better salary, I could move out, build, etc., etc., etc. All right, let's move up to the $3,000 price point. That bracket, I could have about $1,200 in flexibility, not having a vehicle, not paying gas, no insurance. I have about $1,200 to spend, and I could buy a property around $200,000. Now, that $200,000 is an overall figure for my entire mortgage. So the house itself would be less than that $200,000 because I have to account for the government tax, I have to account for my mortgage and my deed costs. All right, so we step up to $4,000. Why is it at $4,000 I could only still afford $200,000 a month? Well, at $400,000 I said, let us include a vehicle into the equation. And if you include a vehicle into the equation, then the step up that you might have had in home reduces because you have that vehicle included. Now, if you don't have a vehicle included, you're going to be making an additional $400, which will take you up to $260,000. All right, so when we move up to the $5,000 bracket, you're looking at having a disposable income for your mortgage about close to $1,600. That will allow you to afford a property about $260,000. All right, and then when you move up to $6,000, you're looking at about $300,000 in a property that you can afford, which gives you about $1,800 in salary that you could allocate to buying a home. And then when you move up to $8,000, you're looking at a very, very comfortable home of $470,000. Now, of course, you have dual incomes. So if you have two persons in a home earning $5,000, that allows you to go above the $470,000 range. If you have two persons in a home earning $4,000, then you're looking at a salary, a property around $470, because you have the two salaries combining, and that's why they say two less salaries better than one. Two salaries combining, and you'll have more flexibility, so you could build a house, buy a house around $470,000. All right, so this information very, very useful, because everybody, when they're looking to buy a property, that's the first question: what I could afford, what I could afford, what I could afford. So I will make this information available to you if you want, and we could have consultation. You could call me 492-6128 or WhatsApp me, and we could have a dialogue, and I could give you some estimates based on what you are making at the end of the month, what you could possibly afford. Now, of course, this is a very perfect scenario. You have people who have student loans. You have people who, of course, have their car payments to make. So this is not as true to life as, you know, what everybody in society is experiencing. But it is a good guidance point to help you to understand what your salary could afford when you're looking to buy a property. And that has been another episode of Caribidreams TV. I'm your host, Maurice John, Mr. Property. And you could call me, 492-6128. Let's talk about property. Let's talk about what you can afford now. All right, we out.